Well, that was weird. Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan, and we have some a baseball regional to talk about, a little bit of off-season football news. It's talking season. SEC coaches meetings are going on right now. We have some actual football games to talk about now because they are officially scheduled and TV slotted and all that fun stuff. But as always, let's start off with recruiting a little bit. So the first major official visit weekend of the summer is this coming weekend. I gave a full list of the entire summer as I had it last week. I'll reemphasize that list in the weekly recruiting wrap up tomorrow on GamecockScoop.com. But I'll go ahead and I'll run down it's a quick 6 names that I have right now. You got your 3 biggest targets are 4-star receivers, Parker Livingstone and Jalewis Solomon, and then a 4-star running back, Braylon Russell. Interestingly, I kind of mentioned this last week, Russell and Livingstone are kind of in that more southwestern recruiting footprint. Livingstone's from Texas, Russell from Arkansas. So we'll see if South Carolina can continue to try to make inroads there. Obviously, Justin Stepp has a lot of ties out there, and new offensive coordinator Dowell Loggins has some ties out there. You also have 3-star safety Kaj Sanders, who we had a quick article on the Insiders Forum from Adam Friedman on yesterday. And then another DB, Chasen Johnson, out of Florida, and defensive lineman Dinas White out of North Carolina. Those are the 6 that I have right now. I'll keep the board updated on if there's a couple more names. There's also been several unofficial visitors for camps and stuff. I believe I mentioned last week. If I didn't, I wrote about it in the article on Dante Reno, that he's coming in this week to throw a little bit for camp. And obviously he'll be able to kind of help with some of those official visitors as well. Other news that I kind of teased on the recruiting front, Dante Reno got an Elite 11 invite officially last week, pretty soon after we signed off the podcast last week. That's a big deal. You actually have 4 that would make, well, right now you currently have 3 guys on the roster that are former Elite 11 guys. Spencer Rattler won the MVP in 2018, I believe. You actually had another Elite 11 guy, Ryan Helinski, who's no longer at South Carolina, but you had recruited him from that same Elite 11. And then you have Luke Doty and DeCarian Joyner, who both competed in the Elite 11 in their own right. So yeah, Reno adds to that list. They're moving it from Oregon to LA this year, that's a big time honor, and he'll go out there and compete. And obviously we'll keep you updated on how he does out there. But just another way that he's kind of getting South Carolina's name on the map before he even arrives on campus. I believe that made him like the 7th ever. I was trying to think of a couple more off the top of my head. Blake Mitchell was one. Steven Garcia was one. There was one more. Brandon McElwain was one. So, kind of a hodgepodge of people that have very much contributed, people that may still contribute, and people that it didn't work out with. But we're hoping the best for Dante, obviously. So yeah, if you want to go back and read that article, I got a couple of cool quotes from him. That's on the website from last week. But yeah, let's talk a little SEC Media Days. We'll have an article kind of breaking down some of what Beamer said today.
Coaches meetings.
At the not Media Days, coaches meetings. But they got a little huddle from him, and I got some of that from our friends over at the Georgia rival site, actually. But anyway. We both listened to that before we hopped on here. What kind of stood out to you from Beamer's comments coming out of those coaches meetings today?
Not a ton. He's tired of talking about 8 versus 9 SEC schedule. He kind of just started saying, y'all know what we're here for, which we're going to talk about that in a second on here, but I can understand why he might be tired of it. Talked about tampering a little bit. gambling a little bit. I mean, there was nothing crazy, although I do definitely think the tampering stuff is still on his mind. It was hard not to listen to that and kind of have Marshawn Lloyd or Jordan Birch's names running through your head.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I took.
Yeah, he was asked a question kind of about like how do you cut down on tampering? What have you guys been doing with tampering? Do you report tampering? That sort of thing. And the reason it kind of seemed like he was talking about Lloyd and Birch and Bell and those guys that you would think of is he immediately said basically those guys. He said we lost 4 guys who were key contributors and it was strange. So kind of tiptoed around it, but didn't really. He was like, yeah, I mean, you guys all
That's not tiptoeing.
Yeah, he basically was like, I talked to all those guys 2 or 3 days before they're in the portal and everything seemed fine. So but he did kind of say that there's a weird balance in it because of all the third parties involved. This was the case. This has always been the case with recruiting, and now with the portal as well. You throw NIL in there, it's a whole thing, right? We always heard about the like $100 handshakes and stuff like that from boosters. That it's like your school could get in trouble for that, but you probably didn't like really control any of that. So he kind of talked a little bit about like, let's talk Oregon and Birch, right? I mean, he didn't bring these up specifically, right? This is what I'm saying, but like, is it Oregon's fault for tampering with Birch if it was some random booster like Phil Knight or whatever? Not necessarily Phil Knight, but that came to Birch and was like, hey, let's work out this deal. Is that Oregon football program's fault? And so he was kind of like, you don't want to throw stones at glass houses, basically. Like, you don't want to call out someone else because you don't know what your own third parties are doing and all that sort of thing. So it's definitely a complicated issue, but he did kind of mention, like, yeah, we should probably be looking into the tampering stuff, but that is also kind of difficult because the same sort of stuff has been going on in recruiting for 30 years or whatever.
That's kind of what it is. It's same problems, or some people wouldn't even say it's a problem. Same stuff, different way it happens, I guess. You just added in a transfer portal now. You've got different timeline because now you're looking at December transfer portal instead of maybe just during the recruiting cycle. I don't really know people are going to get paid in college football. It's been happening for 130 years. That's just kind of the way it is.
I did find it interesting that it seems like there's a little bit of a common respect among the coaches, at least in the SEC, when they hear about things. He mentioned that he's had other SEC coaches call him when he heard about tampering going on with one of South Carolina's players, and that he's done the same if he hears about tampering going on with other.
Well, there is still the year sit out too. You have to sit out a year to transfer within the conference. So that does make that a lot less common, I guess, that a player would move within the league.
Well, yeah, I didn't even necessarily hear that statement as he was saying,
yeah,
Mississippi State's tampering with someone from LSU, so I call LSU. I viewed it as more if there's like in the situation like Florida State when got Jaheim Bell, I think he was saying like he's had programs call about other programs tampering with South Carolina kids, and he's done the same. So there seems to be at least a little bit of a common understanding among people within the conference about the tampering stuff. But I mean, we do see some interconference transfers, especially graduate transfers. So who knows? But yeah, that was pretty much the only interesting thing. They did talk a little bit about online gambling, which obviously has been an issue across multiple sports, professional, whatever. And whether or not they are talking to the kids about it. And he said that they kind of had, but that they need to continue to emphasize it because, yeah, you can just like download DraftKings on your phone or whatever and make a quick bet and not realize that
he has to get reminded he can't bet on March Madness every year.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I think that stuff's outdated, but I also understand why you don't really want to set the precedent of allowing people that have a say in how games go, betting on any sort of sports. And you wouldn't want to get into like, well, you can bet on every sport except for your own. So I understand I understand from a regulatory standpoint why that is, but it's definitely difficult now that everyone can do it on their phone. I mean, we just look back at Calvin Ridley, who's coming back into the league in the NFL, but he had to sit out an entire year because while he was recovering from his like mental health stuff or whatever, he placed a bet on a random game on his phone, you know?
Yeah, that's about all I had from Beamer. Should we talk what he didn't want to talk about, the one thing, some 8-9 schedule?
Let's do it. So, yeah, the big deal now, obviously, with Texas and Oklahoma coming into the league, you have 16 teams, and you are trying to figure out how to make a conference schedule actually reflect the conference, which we talked a little bit about last week, how in the way that things have been currently, sometimes you don't do a home and home with the team for like 8 years, maybe more.
Yeah.
So we talked about some of the proposals. The most popular proposal seems to be a 9-game SEC schedule with 3 permanents and 5 rotating,
6
or 6
you
rotating.
get 12 other teams in
Right.
because 16 you the 3 and 6
Yep.
on 6 off the other 12.
Right. But obviously there is a little bit of pushback to the idea of going to 9 conference games because you have teams like South Carolina, teams like Florida, teams like Kentucky that have a permanent opponent in a Power 5 conference. South Carolina with Clemson, Florida with Florida State, Kentucky with Louisville. And then you also have like future scheduling concerns, like Alabama has like Wisconsin on the schedule coming up in a couple years, stuff like that. So the real concern with those things is you're pretty much locking in 10 Power 5 games for each of those schools every year. How do you sort of make sure that that is equal and equitable? And then we were talking a little bit before this, does it even matter? Because if you're expanding the playoffs to 16 teams, you have to think if you go 10-2 in the SEC, you're probably right there at the doorstep of the playoffs every year anyway.
Yeah, and my big thing with that, look, I understand these decisions get made on TV money, on conference revenue, on playoff sharing revenue, all the things you just mentioned. What are we doing here if we're not protecting rivalries like in college football? What are we doing here if South Carolina can't play Tennessee and Georgia every season? If LSU can't play, I don't know, Alabama and Auburn every year? If Auburn can't play Georgia and Alabama every year? Like, I can go on. I can do this for an hour, but
well,
I would say
the really crazy one you brought up is if you're bringing Texas into the conference, how do you
Yep.
bring Texas into the conference and not have them play Oklahoma and Texas A&M every year?
I have no good answer for that. I think we all kind of assumed that would happen when they did join. I would say
the people that make the money decisions want that to happen, to be clear.
you should. Those games are money bonanzas. And I would say really, unless you're like Vanderbilt or Missouri, maybe everyone's got at least 2 rivals in the SEC, like 2 games those fan bases want to play every year. We had a hard time. We were talking about it last week, narrowing down, all right, what 3 games would you want South Carolina to play every year? Now you're talking about 1 if it gets to that point. And like, if it is 1, let's say they go to the 1-7 model where you have 1 opponent every year, 7 on, 7 off. You're probably not getting Georgia because they're going to keep Florida. You're probably not getting Tennessee. They're going to have to play Vanderbilt because Vanderbilt needs someone. You're probably down to Kentucky or Missouri. That Mizzou probably gets Arkansas. You're probably down to Kentucky, really, if it's just 1.
Which, you know, doesn't work out terribly for you from a scheduling perspective, but it's not very fun. And
it's not. Are you going to tell me that South Carolina is going to play Kentucky every year, but only Georgia and Tennessee every other year?
Right. It erases a lot of rivalries that you've built over the last 30 years, right? You've been in the SEC for 30 years now. And I know, like you said, you'd be 3rd on the pecking order in Georgia's rivalries, but you're still on the pecking order in Georgia's rivalries.
Yeah, you have that game kept in the 3-6 model, I think.
So, I think it seems pretty obvious that that's where they're going to have to go. But some of the quotes that I've read after the first couple of days from other coaches across the league, I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Drinkwitz. He said basically that he's amazed that 13 colonies were able to form a union.
Yes, that was Drink. I saw that quote.
But yeah, the 16 coaches or whatever can't decide 8 or 9 games. So it does seem like that there is still some posturing and some arguments going on, which, you know, how much of that is I'm going to take this hardline stance just to make sure that my 3 permanent opponents aren't all super difficult, or that I at least get to pick one of mine or whatever. It's hard to say, but I think ultimately you have to land there, right? Like I don't see a world where you try to keep 8. And I did see, I think it was The Athletic put out something yesterday that was kind of like criticizing the SEC if they are going to take such a giant share of all of these giant teams, but then only play 8 conference schedules.
Yeah, and I do think there's like if this might work against some coaches, but if the holdup here is the Power 5 thing you were talking about, right? That South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, whatever, would have to play an extra Power 5 game with their in-state rivalries. The Big Ten, I don't know if they still have it, for a long time had a rule that you had to play at least one non-conference Power 5 game. That's how you ended up with like Michigan playing Oregon State, Michigan State's playing Washington in a home and home. I don't know. I think Ohio State's played a couple. They've played some big ones against like Oklahoma. Point being, if the 10th game here is the holdup, that South Carolina's 10th game would be Clemson, or Florida's would be Florida State, you can schedule that in. You can make everybody play a Power 5, or at least an FBS. They don't, just not to FCS for their 10th game. There's ways around that. To me, so much of what makes college football fun is rivalries, those games, the ones you circle before the season starts, and you're getting rid of most of them in the 8-game model. Like, you would be down to 1 per team that's happening every year.
Now, granted, that does give you the flexibility to play I guess both of them kind of do.
Yeah, they do, because it's either 7 on, 7 off, or 6 on, 6 off. You're playing everybody every other year either way.
Right. But I guess worst case scenario, if you were to keep the 8-game model, you have more flexibility in your out-of-conference scheduling, and you're still going to see every school within a 4-year rotation. So,
yeah,
but it's not quite the same. You're going to lose some of those rivalries.
Lose some great games. I mean, I don't know, if you're a Bama fan, I think you want to play Auburn and Tennessee every year. Like, that doesn't seem like a controversial statement. You wouldn't be able to do that in this model.
Yeah, no doubt. So the other question is, what is going to happen with the conference championship game with the new, like, are there still going to, there's probably not going to be an East and West anymore, right? Are they going to do like pods and then figure it out that way? Is it just going to be the top 2 schools? Are they going to get rid of the conference championship game altogether because of the expansion of the playoff and not building in another game? Because probably if you're 1 and 2 in the SEC, you're both making it anyway.
I wouldn't mind seeing that game go away. We've talked about that in the past. I think at that point, if you're stacking 12 regular season games on a conference title game, on at least 3, could be as many as 4 playoff games if you like were one of the lower seeds and made a run to the title. I don't need college football teams playing a 17-game season, 16 games. It just feels like a lot. I wouldn't mind seeing conference title games go away if the playoff goes to a 4-round format. You could play the first round that weekend and then have some time off like they do now. But the conference title game brings in a lot of money, so I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, it's tough. I thought I had remembered reading this. I did just read that Greg Sankey did say back in November that it's going to get rid of the divisions.
Yeah, those are gone.
Texas and Oklahoma joined. But yeah, are you still going to have a conference championship game? But again, it's hard to kind of justify that once both those teams are in anyway for the playoffs. So
yeah, that's a mess. I haven't seen any conversation about that this week. I really just think the 8-9 is the pressing issue this week, because Texas and OU are in the league next year, and the next year's football schedules come out in September usually. So we're 3 months away from having a football schedule with Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC that's got to be built. Like, that kind of needs to happen now, I think.
That's true. Speaking of scheduling, we did get some news this week. You set me up there, right? We did get some news this week of the game times for the first 3 kickoffs for South Carolina's 2023 season. So we got a game under the lights in Charlotte against North Carolina at 7:30. Then the first home game of the season versus Furman is also going to be 7:30. I think that one's on ESPN Plus.
Yeah.
Do you remember who's carrying North Carolina?
ABC.
It's
the game of the week. Well,
yeah,
there's a couple other.
Yeah, but I saw that prime time.
I was thinking, like, I know we'll get to the last game that got announced first, and we'll circle back to UNC.
And then game 3 open up the SEC schedule. at Georgia, and that's going to be the 3:30 CBS game, which you mentioned, I believe, when you tweeted about it. That's probably one of the last opportunities for South Carolina to play in that 3:30 SEC slot before it goes to the Big Ten in 2024, which I think we said last week it was transitioning this year.
It's a split. I saw some 3:30 CBS games that got announced today that are Big Ten. I think it's like and then the Georgia Florida. It's like a 50-50 split this year, I think is what I read. And then next year, 2024, it becomes Big Ten. So that UNC game week 1, we've talked about it a little bit. We're going to talk about it plenty more in the next, I don't know, I think we're at 94 days till kickoff or something.
5, yeah, you're right.
Spencer Rattler, Drake May, neutral site, 2 fan bases that travel, gonna be fun. Could that be game day? Because the biggest game of week 1, I'm looking at it now, is LSU Florida State. It's gonna be 2 top 10 teams, but it's Sunday. That's the Sunday night game. It's Labor Day weekend. That game's not on that Saturday. They gotta be somewhere that Saturday morning.
Yeah,
7:30 ABC game.
If it's not game day, it's almost certainly going to be SEC Nation. There's going to be a pregame show there.
I'm just looking at the rest of the week 1 schedule now, and like there's some interesting games. You got Florida Utah, but that's a Thursday night game. You got TCU in Colorado for Dion's first game, but it's at noon and it's on Fox, so sometimes that's not always the turnaround. You got West Virginia, Penn State at Penn State. That's kind of fun-ish, but it's an NBC game again. There's not a lot of big games that are actually on ESPN. I know it's not always an ESPN game for game day, like broadcast-wise, but it feels plausible that College Game Day could be coming to South Carolina, North Carolina.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I also am like even trying to think of where they would set up around the stadium.
Yeah, that's true. Having been to that stadium, there's not a lot of.
Maybe they just shut off one of the areas of the parking lots. But
I'm trying to think if they've ever been to like an ACC championship game there and set up or whatever. I don't know off the top of my head.
Probably, but anyway, yeah, that is really interesting. How are you feeling about the nighttime Furman kickoff?
Less enthused. Less enthused.
Now I think that was probably a situation like Georgia State last year, where once it's on ESPN Plus, the school itself probably has a little bit more say on when it's going to be, and if you're going to play a Furman like game, you probably have a little more fun under the lights and get a little bit more crowd participation.
It'll be juiced. It's the first home game. If they're coming off a big win over UNC, it's going to be a really good environment. I mean, it should be anyway. But
the reason you don't like the primetime kind of, game that's expected to be a blowout at night is because it's going to be such a late night for you after the press conferences and stuff. But the average fan probably kind of likes that, especially in August.
In September, I was going to say it's perfect.
So it's not 1,000,000 degrees in Columbia.
Attendance-wise, that's the reason. If you're saying the school has some leeway on it, no, I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of people aren't going to sit in the stands for a noon game against Furman.
I mean, I've done it. I've been in the upper deck at Williams Brice at noon in September, and it's not fun. You leave half of your body weight in sweat up there.
I believe it. And then Georgia week 3, 3:30. See what happens.
It's going to be a tough game, but you imagine if you take care of business in Charlotte that you're probably somewhere, and presumably you beat Furman, handily. You're probably somewhere around the top 15.
Yeah, probably.
Georgia
should be number 1 Georgia at that point still. So that's a quarter of the football time set. The rest of them get set on the 2-week basis within the seasons. We won't know anything else till September about when games are starting. But I think you feel okay about that for South Carolina. You get a big week 1 night game and a home game under the lights in there, and we'll see what it looks like from that point on for the rest of the year once the network can start flexing in season.
Yep, and we will have plenty of off-season football coverage on GamecocksScoop.com. Even more so here in a couple weeks when baseball's gone, or here in a couple of days when baseball's gone. Perhaps we'll see. So we speculated all last week about whether or not South Carolina would host a regional, whether or not they deserve to. I still think it's arguable that they didn't deserve to, but they did end up getting a top 16 national seed. And probably got one of the toughest draws of any regional, but that's kind of the situation that they had played themselves into. And like we said, should probably just be thankful that you're playing in Columbia at all. So obviously they're the number 1 seed. They kick off tomorrow, or no, Friday. We usually do this on Thursday. Friday against Central Connecticut, right?
Yep.
I have no idea where that is. I lived in Rhode Island for 6 years. I drove through Connecticut a lot of times. I have no idea where Central Connecticut is. But anyway, Central Connecticut. The other 2 teams, you have NC State and Campbell.
Yeah.
Campbell, the 2 seed, NC State, the 3 seed, and Central Connecticut, the 4 seed. I think both Campbell and NC State are capable of winning this regional. But I also think you have the home field advantage, which, was quite the advantage for the first half of the season, but like everything else kind of fell off on the back half. And Mark Hickson, I still think, is probably coaching for his job here. I think if you win this regional at home, somewhat all is forgiven, and you move forward and try to hope that you're healthier next year again and all that sort of thing. But if you lose this regional in Columbia, first one since...
Well, they had the one in 21, but they were a 2 seed because the 1 seed wasn't allowed to host, and it was a half capacity crowd. First time since 2016 they've been a 1 seed in a regional.
Right. So yeah, step forward, but it still felt like maybe came up short of expectations after the expectations you set by climbing up to number 3 in the country earlier in the season.
Yeah, I will say I think there's a double-edged sword to this. We had media Monday after the selection, and they were kind of talking, all right, Friday's a new opening day. What happened last month doesn't matter. We still got to host. We didn't play ourselves out of that. I do think that's true. You can look at it that way, that a new season starts on Friday. You're in your ballpark. I also think you made things much tougher for yourself by what happened the last month. Campbell's I know a lot of people might not know about them as a mid-major. Campbell's a really good team. They're top 10 in the country in most major offensive categories. They were in the Knoxville Regional last year. They gave Tennessee a real scare when they were the number 1 overall seed. Like, that team can play. NC State, that team can play too. They were top 25 RPI, well-balanced roster. I think you do handle the 4 seed. I think you got a good draw there. It's not one of the tougher 4s on paper, but you played yourself into a much more difficult weekend here by what you did in the last month. And they're going to have to play really, really well. I guess that I would say the brand of baseball they've played the last month is not going to get it done against Campbell or NC State.
Yeah, I think to some degree you got to hope that Campbell and NC State get into each other's bullpens a little bit. Yeah. And that you have your starter go pretty deep against Central Connecticut and don't have to use very many arms.
That's what I was going to ask you about next. Now that you have the draw, the big game's probably going to be Saturday. That's your swing game against either Campbell or NC State. How would you set it up this weekend, pitching-wise?
Well, I know that there's still some questions about Will Sanders' health as well, right? Like, do we expect to have him?
They said he was expected to pitch, but it's more likely out of the bullpen than at starting a game.
Okay, so give me who you think are going to be the starters, and I'll tell you who you should start first. So give me 3, I guess.
I'm thinking Mahoney, Becker, and Hicks probably.
That's tough. I guess you would, out of those 3, if you're playing it safe, you probably throw Becker and
on Friday.
And expect him to be able to at least overwhelm an inferior opponent. And then you save your two arms that have been throwing the best down this stretch in Hicks and Mahoney for whoever you have on Saturday.
I think Mahoney has to pitch Saturday. That's kind of what I'm building everything off of. He's been your best guy. That game's going to be almost certainly a 1-0 versus 1-0. Get yourself into a regional final where if you lose that, you got to go to the loser's bracket. I think you got to build this around Mahoney Saturday. I kind of side with keeping Becker as fresh as long as possible because he's a lefty and you might need some matchups later in the week with Campbell or NC State. But also I think you still don't want to take chances on Friday. I mean, Central Connecticut's not as dangerous as Campbell or NC State, but they are still a tournament team. And you don't want to mess around and have to use a bunch of bullpen arms on Friday. So I think Becker or Hicks. I think Eli Jones could be a candidate for Friday because he started so many midweeks, and that's kind of the type of team you'd see in a midweek.
Yeah, that actually might be your best call. Is to go Eli Jones.
And then Mahoney Saturday, probably Hicks Sunday, and then if you have to play twice Sunday with the loser's bracket or Monday, Becker starts that game.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Have you started to do any research on Central Connecticut? Do you have any sort of tidbits or facts on what to expect out of what is their mascot? I have no idea.
Devils, I think, Blue Devils, something like that. I was looking at that. There's not a ton that jumps off the page. They don't strike out a lot. That was the one thing I saw. They're small ball, put the ball in play. They actually have struck out the least of any team in this whole tournament, which is interesting. But you just kind of look at South Carolina's the most. Yeah,
I was about to say I saw that in a tweet that you put out that you're matching up the most strikeouts versus the least strikeouts in the first game.
But it's not a big power lineup. They only have 54 home runs all season. They're going to try to do it small ball, obviously, just against the type of arms we're going to be seeing with South Carolina. I do think it's not so much to disrespect them. I think it's really important South Carolina wins that game big. A, to get some confidence up for your lineup. B, to just start the weekend right. C, because I think you're going to need everything in the tank to get out of this regional with Campbell and NC State. You can't burn any gas on Central Connecticut. You just can't. That can't be a 6-3 game in the eighth where you still got to think about it. It just, I mean, obviously winning is the most important thing, but you need that to be comfortable, I think, to feel good about getting out of the weekend.
And remind me if somehow you do make it through. South Carolina's matched up with
Gainesville. You have
Florida.
It's Florida, UConn, Texas Tech, and I think the 4 seed there's Florida A&M. So you'd be going to Gainesville if the chalk holds to play a Florida team you did sweep in the regular season. And then if any of those
that feels like a long time ago.
And then if any of those other 3 teams advanced and you did, they'd be coming to Founders for a super.
Right. So yeah, very interesting. We will have full coverage of that. The game on Friday is at 7.
7 o'clock. Yep.
And then obviously the rest of the schedule will play out dependent on the way that goes.
It's 6 if you win. So if you win Friday, it's at 6 on Saturday for the 1-0 game. If you lose Friday, you turn around and have the elimination game at noon Saturday. Which if they lose to Central Connecticut, it's going to be a very different conversation we're having. But
and then anything else that you had on baseball? I have a couple of just like random South Carolina adjacent notes, but
I guess just this is what it all comes down to, right? Like we're talking about Mark, we're talking about the future of the program. Like I am of the belief they have to win this regional for him. I kind of think that's just where this is trending. And you don't really have any excuses. Like I know it's a tough draw, but you got it in your own ballpark. And you should still, that team that's been in there, right? I mean, Kingston, Mahoney, they've all talked about how this team's still here, the team from March and April. We've got to bring it out. If that team's still there, you could win this regional.
Yeah, what are we looking like from an injury standpoint? I know you already kind of mentioned Sanders might pitch out of the bullpen, but
yeah, you're in better shape there too. That takes another excuse. Cole Messina's out of concussion protocol. I saw him at the watch party on Monday. Kingston said Monday he was like on an exercise bike and taking swings. He's going to play Friday. Cole Messina's going to play. And he said Braylon Wimmer can play shortstop, that he's healthy enough to play defense now, which does create a bit of a crunch lineup-wise, I guess, because who's the odd man out there? Is it Braswell? Do you take Tippett out and move Braswell to second?
It's not like either of them have set the world on fire from the plate, so maybe just hot hand approach there. But who looks better in BP? You know?
Yeah, because one of them's, I guess you could DH one of them. But either way, Wimmer's taking shortstop, which means someone's got to move around on that infield, which is something else I'm keeping an eye on this weekend. And other than that, they're healthy, huh?
Still not expecting McGillis, right?
Not expecting it, no. They're about as healthy as they've been all year, McGillis aside, or at least since like March and April, considering you've got Sanders able to pitch, Messina back, Wimmer playing defense, Lee Croy's healthy. There's really no excuses, even though it is a tough draw.
And then, one question that I guess South Carolina fans might be asking after the last 5 years is whether or not they would have been better off with a certain coach down the road. So Chad Holbrook just signed a 5-year extension with the College of Charleston. Obviously, he did not have the sort of career at South Carolina that people were expecting, but also I think you have to look now at the way that the difficulty in the SEC ramped up during his tenure here. Now you could also argue if he had done better, maybe South Carolina is part of that upper echelon too. So it's kind of, chicken and the egg. But anyway, he found his spot down the road, and they want to keep him around. And then the only other little note that I have, which is not baseball related, but Julian Phillips, who South Carolina recruited pretty heavily out of high school. He originally was from South Carolina, then played at like prep school in Missouri, went to Tennessee, and had with like entered the portal sort of, but also had his name in the NBA draft conversation. He's going to just stay in that NBA draft conversation. I know there's a little bit of speculation around whether or not South Carolina would try to target him in the portal, but we can shut that one down.
Yeah, I think your men's basketball roster is close to set at what it is now. We talked about that, I think, maybe 2 shows ago, but that's kind of about where it is at this point.
Yep. So, all right. Well, definitely keep up with GamecocksScoop.com. I will have the weekly recruiting wrap up tomorrow. Perry's been doing a fun series on ranking the position groups from 10 to 1, which, unsurprisingly, number 10 was running back.
It's kind of got to be.
Yeah. And then actually, I think going into the spring, we would have said number 9 was edge, but actually number 9, offensive line. If you want to read those breakdowns, those are on GamecocksScoop.com. And then we'll have full coverage this weekend of baseball, as Alan's going to be there for all those games. Pauline will be there shooting pictures. And yeah, till then, enjoy the nice beginning of summer weather, and we'll see you next time. How are we looking like for the regional weather?
I didn't even look. Let's see.
I hit in broadcast, but it's just color wheeling on me. So if you're still watching, show's over, but having trouble connecting. I don't need you to connect. I need you to disconnect.
Looks mostly clear weather-wise, like 20% chance of rain Saturday and Sunday, but nothing beyond that.
All right. Well, it doesn't look like it's going to let me end it.
I'm just going to close the stat broadcast, the StreamYard.
Yep.
Okay, see you.
Bye.